This time on Poll Hub, who needs friends when a robot will be your bestie? Meta's Mark Zuckerberg made news recently when he predicted a future in which AI friendbots on Facebook and Instagram would fulfill our need for companionship. Doesn't he watch any science fiction? Well, anyway, then there's a huge increase in states and localities that are banning books. Civil libertarians have been up in arms, but are there good reasons to keep some books out of the hands of some people, especially kids? We'll talk with Marist librarians about all of this. And then it's almost vacation season. So our fun fact asks if summer really is the best time to hit the road. Stick around. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Dapper.
I'm Mary Griffith.
I'm Neil Viswanathan.
And I'm Lee Berengoff.
You may have seen in the news recently that Mark Zuckerberg, who's the head of Meta owns Facebook and WhatsApp and Instagram, he was talking about how artificial intelligence, which Meta has invested a huge amount of money in, along with a couple of other tech giants, could be the solution to what he called the loneliness epidemic. One of the quotes that's been pulled out is he said, most Americans have 3 or fewer friends, and this could solve that. And we have talked about on this podcast, especially during the pandemic, and it's been talked about long ago in the past, Bowling Alone, a book that was very famous a couple decades ago, this idea that Americans have fewer close friends than they used to, and that has an impact on society. So he's not talking about something that we haven't talked about, that society hasn't talked about, and that doesn't exist. His solution for it, I think, though, is what has raised some questions. So is there a loneliness epidemic? Let's talk about that first, and then we'll jump into the discussion. In 2023, the Surgeon General under Biden, Vivek Murthy, declared that loneliness was an epidemic, noting that loneliness is far more than just a bad feeling. And while COVID certainly exacerbated the problem, about half of U.S. adults had already reported experiences of loneliness before the pandemic. So, is AI the solution? Couple of pieces of data, and we'll talk about it. According to a November 2024 Institute for Family Studies YouGov survey, this was of adults under 40, so Americans under 40, 1% of young Americans claim to already have an AI friend. So again, this is 2024, just a few months ago, 1%. 10% are open to the idea. And just over half of American young adults, about 57%, say that they are against AI friends, either for ethical reasons or they're just not comfortable with it. So I want to start with you, Neil, because you are the youngest of our young Americans on this podcast. Actually, with this definition, you're the only one on right now. What is your sense? One, have you ever engaged with an AI bot in a kind of friend way? And what do you think of that?
So I watched the movie Her that came out about 10 years ago, and it seemed like such a far off idea that someone could form a meaningful relationship with an AI bot. Like back then, AI wasn't even really available for commercial use in the same way. So it seemed like such a dystopian idea. But I still don't know if I would be completely open to the idea of an AI friend. I think that it just would not feel in any way like a real relationship. But there are times when I've been using AI when I found myself almost caught up in a friendly conversation after, if I ask it to do a task and then I ask it to elaborate a few times. Sometimes there's some emotion that comes out in the chats. For example, Snapchat has an AI, and Snapchat is all about personal communication. So there's a Snapchat AI bot, and the questions that, when I'm playing around with it, that I'll ask that are very different than the questions that I'll ask ChatGPT, for example. And it almost feels like a real person's talking sometimes, but I don't know if Snapchat, Instagram, those AI platforms are advanced enough yet to make it feel truly like a friendship. But I think that's definitely on the horizon in the near future.
Lee, would you have an AI bot for a friend?
Well, as the audience knows, I am the resident Luddite here, so this is really testing the limits, I would say. It's interesting. A lot of conversations people have are one-sided, and certainly this is an opportunity to get interaction going, which is, you can prompt, you can get reactions. The communication is always very polite. A lot of pleases and thank yous in there. And so, it sort of has a lot of the makings of what a friend is. You can't exactly go to the movies with it, or maybe you can.
Maybe you can.
Yeah, you can in essence, but you can't get in the car. It seems like you're pushing the envelope.
Well, the car already is your friend. It talks to you, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's true also. So I guess, here's the bottom line. It's a little weird for people of my generation. I suspect the people who grow up with this may find that, interaction has evolved to you bounce ideas off, well, what do you think's a good school for me to go to? What do you think I should do in my career? And, there's a lot of information it can channel, funnel, synthesize, and give back to you in a, kind of like a cooperative way. And, I find that interesting because the advice can be, really on target and customized to who you are. So you got to sort of go with the flow. And it seems like that is the direction we're going.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the best case is your AI bot is one of your friends, but it's not your only friend. The thing about this is that it's actually already happening and not in the tiny numbers that we suggested in that previous data. According to World Network, in a February 2025 poll, which is only a couple months ago, 26% of the respondents who had used a dating app admitted to flirting with a chatbot or AI. Further, 60% of the respondents who had used a dating app say that they have either suspected or discovered that someone they matched with was a bot or AI. Mary, that seems like I would be off of a dating app in a second if that happened to me. I don't know.
I would agree with you. And that latter percentage is a little bit terrifying. You put your trust in something and you're looking to the technology as a tool to help. But in the same vein, thinking about this as a tool, dating can be intimidating for many people. And so is this a way to help build confidence? Whereas you're not looking at this as a partner or as, a potential partner, but as a tool to help engage in conversation. And, if you're shy, what might the responses be and how might you react? So that's just something that might be a positive. The whole idea that someone that they had been interacting with is a bot, that takes it to a whole new level.
So, but you have kids, and this has been a little light so far. There's actually a very serious part of this brought up in a recent television series called Adolescence, which has gotten a lot of attention because of what happens to the 13-year-olds. I think they're 13-year-olds in it, and a young boy kills a young girl and is kind of directed to do that by, an AI bot. This is science fiction, kind of, but there's a lot of people in the industry who say this stuff is not safe for kids. As a parent with kids who are, they've got devices, these things could come into their feeds, whatever. What do you think?
We try to limit, as most of our listeners know, the access to technology, but my boys do have phones. I mean, I hope that they're still a little young for this topic, even though I know they're not. But there is a real danger and there's a real concern about it. Because you really don't know who they're interacting with, because as much as you have ability to monitor and to oversee what it is that they're doing, it can never be 100%. It can never be foolproof. And not just that, but live interactions with their friends and what they're being exposed to through that. So it really comes back to parental oversight. As cliche as it sounds, is giving advice to your children and having the open conversations. I recently had a discussion with our 10-year-old about an editing app. I know that this is a little different from the topic that we're talking about now, but he's like, no, Mom, it's okay. There are no privacy issues. I can do this. Nobody's going to get my images. And he's like, why is it such a big deal anyway? And, we had a little limited time. I said, we'll talk about it later. And I said, let me take a look at the privacy statement. And I didn't go as far as going to the privacy statement, but just Googling, are there privacy concerns? And 100% there were privacy concerns. And so I had to have the conversation with him you may not be doing anything, but people can get your image and do bad things with them. I mean, we had to limit it and make it age appropriate. But it's the same thing here, is that you need to be aware of who you're interacting with, what the responses are. And if this is going against your gut, if you're engaging in a conversation with whether it be a bot or someone else online that doesn't feel right to you, go with your gut and raise the conversation and bring it back to me, dad, or a trusted adult to get guidance.
Yeah. Is there any chance, I don't know whether it has been instances of this or we're heading in this direction, but is a legal defense for having done something wrong? My bot told me to do it. And what does that do for a jury of your peers? And do you get a couple bots on there? The other thing I was thinking, when you were talking relationships, what advantages you don't have to deal with, and I'd like you to meet my bot parents and your future bot in-laws. What? If we're going to take
it, you're way beyond her at this point. You've created a whole new her too. Yeah, that's pretty good. Neil, I'm curious, you mentioned AI bots within applications, and I think that For a lot of people at this kind of early stages of AI, they think of it as something you go to. I go to ChatGPT, I do this, I prompt it. But you hinted at something that's actually where I think, the concern is that the AI is not transparent, it's not obvious, it's integrated into other apps that we're using, and you don't know if you're engaging with a bot or not. Is that something you've experienced? Is that something you and your peers are concerned about as far as you know? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely embedded pretty much everywhere in our lives. Like even not just social media applications like Instagram and Snapchat, but any online help desk for pretty much anything these days is AI. Like you have to talk to AI before you can get to a real person. And sometimes it's hard to distinguish if you're talking to a real person or talking to AI. Like I know for Verizon, for the Wi-Fi, they have the help bot on the side of the browser. And sometimes, like I've used it multiple times and I don't know if I'm talking to a real person or a bot. And I think it's hard enough for people my age to distinguish that. But I think for younger kids who are born into this, it's even more difficult. And I think I'm wondering if that might even hinder social interaction. So like Mary, with your younger kids, do you worry about that with the rise of AI, their social interaction might be hindered? Like we saw what happened during COVID with virtual interactions, and this is taking it almost a step further.
100%. I mean, I can't even get my kids to answer me when they're on their phones looking at YouTube or playing a game, so it's
I can't get my husband to either, so it's not just kids.
That's comforting, Jay. But no, 100%, and as a parent, you want to make sure that they are engaging in ways that their friends are to a certain extent, because that is the future and that is, they need to be able to do that. But you also don't want to lose that human interaction either. So it comes back to trying to be well-rounded and trying to be able to approach human relationships and society overall in a responsible way.
Yeah, Mary, I think that's really interesting. I think it's interesting to see how this will all unfold as we progress and as especially younger kids grow up into a society with AI.
We turn now from new technology to one of the most traditional forms of media, books. Book bans in the United States have been around for quite some time. In fact, it's been nearly 400 years since the Puritan government in what is now Quincy, Massachusetts, banned Thomas Morton's New English Canaan. From Nazi book burnings to dystopian novels like Fahrenheit 451, book bans have long been associated with authoritarianism and censorship, signaling an assault on free thought and democracy. Is there a way to balance free speech and limiting what should be available to our nation's children? That's the question we're going to be taking on today. But first, let's start with some of the numbers. Recently, more than 4,500 books in Florida were banned during the 2023-2024 school year after the passage of the Parental Rights in Education law in 2022. And Texas has proposed Senate Bill 13, which would transfer authority to approve school library books from librarians to school boards. Now, according to a YouGov survey in May of 2023, 31% of Americans believed there's a time where a book or novel should be banned from being made available in a public library. 46% of Americans said that there are times when books should be banned from public classrooms or school libraries. So what books do people believe should be banned? Well, 41% of Americans who had read Gender Queer, a memoir, believe it should be banned in schools. 36% who had read The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian believed it should be banned in schools, while 29% who had read 13 Reasons Why noted it should be banned. Now, interestingly, what books do people believe should not be banned? Well, nearly 90% of Americans who read To Kill a Mockingbird believe it should not be banned in schools, and a similar proportion, 88% of people who read Of Mice and Men or The Grapes of Wrath believe they should not be banned. Additionally, according to the American Library Association in March of 2022, after hearing reasons both in support of and in opposition to efforts to remove books from school libraries because some parents found them offensive or inappropriate, voters said they oppose efforts to remove books from school libraries by a 34% margin. 67% who opposed to 33% who were in support of those bans. To better help us unpack the complexities of this debate, two of our colleagues here at Marist University join us today. Elizabeth Clark, who is Marist Coordinator of Library Instruction, and Jillian Freelander, who is Marist Public and Research Services Librarian. Welcome to you both. So when you hear those figures, when you hear that so many books have been banned in schools recently, what initially comes to mind? Elizabeth, why don't we start with you?
It's terribly upsetting, honestly. Libraries bring materials to people who may not be able to afford them or access them in any other way. It's very upsetting to hear that so many books are being removed from libraries. And I know prior to 2023, there's been talk in Florida specifically that some of those books were being requested to be removed, challenged is what it's usually referred to, not by people who actually had children in the school district or even by people who had children at all. It was motivated by their own personal belief systems that they were trying to make decisions for other people and really had no stake in the race in terms of what was in the school libraries. So the fact that it's actually going forward because many of those bans that were and those challenges that happened before were blocked, it's upsetting that it's going forward now.
And Jillian, just to follow up, I have an interest in this topic for many different reasons. One, for a love of literature, and two, I'm a parent. And thinking back to when I was in high school, I remember reading The Catcher in the Rye by Salinger, and that had profound effect on me in a great way. And when I think about that, many moons ago, this is ancient history, when I was in school, I didn't find any of the content in that book to be offensive in any way. But yet, in decades past, it was considered to be controversial. So talk to me, if you will, about the reflection of book bans to the times in which the books are written and how that's changed over the years.
So a lot of what we see in book banning is going against marginalized groups usually and different ideas that society is not supporting. So ideas of sex and gender, diversity in lots of different forms. And we see that kind of both in an evolution of our kind of society and our views and what we're allowing people to read and what we're accepting, and also what we continue to ban and push against. And most of the books that are coming up, especially in schools, youth-focused, are those books promoting diversity. And we see a rise in that as we see a rise in our leadership and what is going on in politics and what is being allowed and accepted.
I'm curious because we've kind of presented this, and I think it's because of public opinion data and the history of book banning as some balance. Is there really, though, a balance to be struck, or is there a different way of approaching what's appropriate? Now, I know you're in a college library. This is very different. When we're talking about like elementary school libraries, I think that's when the public begins to say, oh, well, maybe that's not appropriate for an elementary school library. Is the talking about a ban kind of a binary way of talking about this, and that's not the only way that you deal with the issues of appropriateness of literature for certain age groups?
So before Marist, I worked at a public library, and so I have that background. But I think as Elizabeth was touching on, with people banning books who don't actually have children or don't really have stake in the game, I think when we think of like banning books and materials, if you personally, it's still harmful, but if you personally don't want your children accessing materials, that's one thing. But to then take that away from other youth and other people, that's where it gets harmful and problematic. And to think that your own views are societal and that you can have that say over what other people are doing, what other children are doing, what other people are exposed to, I think that's where we start to see big issues.
Elizabeth, I think it's really interesting, the point that you and Jillian have brought up about the fact that a lot of the opposition does not come from parents. And so when thinking about what books should be permitted in schools, is there a way to incorporate parents into not the decision-making process per se, but educating parents to help guide their children through difficult content, perhaps including something in the curriculum to help them address issues that may come up in an age-appropriate way?
This is actually something we discussed a few years ago. We had a panel with several Marist faculty members, including Lynn Eckert was talking about working through these books with her children. And we were talking a little bit about Little House on the Prairie, which raises issues of the context of the time when they were written. Just talking through why things are being referred that way, why they're using that language, and providing that context. And it's a hard thing to do, just having those conversations with children, having to explain things. And sometimes it means you have to go and educate yourself. And so I think, in terms of, I don't want to create more work for librarians or teachers, but it might be helpful to provide parents with kind of like a context packet of, hey, here's what your child could be reading. Here's what you might want to talk about with them or might come up, just giving them some tools to work through this and maybe give them warning. And if that upsets them, maybe that they can work through that by talking to the teacher or the librarian.
It's interesting. We have data, and I want to read this to you and then get your reaction, from a survey in 2022 from the American Library Association, which you're probably familiar with. And after after hearing reasons both for support and opposition to efforts to remove books from school libraries because parents had complained, voters opposed the efforts to remove the books by a 34-point margin. Mary mentioned that. But from this same survey, when they asked about, well, what do you think of librarians? You guys, 90% of voters, 92% of parents have a favorable view of librarians. Nobody else, there's no other profession that in our polling, nobody likes anybody that much in America. You guys are like the crown jewels here. 89% of voters and 93% of parents said that local public libraries play an important role in communities across the country, including their own. So I'm interested, there's a disconnect here between what librarians and libraries represent to Americans, at least from this polling data, and then this kind of side issue, which at least that's my personal view, kind of this side issue about what's in the library, what's available to people, and what some minority of people, and it could be a large minority in some cases, view as inappropriate. I just wonder what you think about that, this kind of split between we love our librarians, not so sure about this book banning.
I think that regardless of what personal experience you've had with a librarian, there in some senses, libraries are inherently known for providing you with things, be they books, be they computers, internet access. They have helped you in some way. And librarians often serve as a guide, as a way to get to that stuff in terms of just navigating through it. We're not trying to keep you from it. We are making things available to you. And, in terms of economically right now, it's really important that libraries do that. So I think this positive view of librarians and even just the libraries as a necessary thing is because they recognize what librarians can do for them beyond just books.
Yeah, I think there's that level of trust is definitely there because of the access of information and the ability to come seek out what you're looking for. No cost attached, no judgment attached. Can't really find that in a lot of places anymore. It's one of the last remaining third places that kind of exist. But I also think, as Elizabeth touched on, there's that idea that we're going to give you what you're looking for. And there's a trust there. And I think that when we look at book banning, they're putting them side and side. As in, I'm going to trust you to not expose my children to this information versus I'm going to trust you to give me this information. And I think when they're looking at why are we not doing this, it's a level of breaking trust and pushing against what they think we should be doing.
As new librarians emerge, and provide this trusted service to both families and to schools, what is the biggest piece of advice that you could give a new librarian who's starting out their career in an environment where these debates have been occurring?
I think firstly, understanding that it's not personal. When I worked in a public library and I had come across book discussions on why are we putting up LGBT books in the children's department, or why are we exposing our children to this thing? Not taking it personally, that it's not an attack on us, and it honestly has nothing to do with us. It has everything to do with their ideology and what they're trying to push, and that ultimately we are there to do our jobs and provide information and resources, and to do that fairly and justly, and that's always been our job. And also that libraries are not neutral spaces. As much as we say they are, they're not. And we are there to provide needed, necessary information. And that is ideally why you got into this role. And part of our job is to push back on this and defend this and stand up for the people who aren't getting this access. It's literally what we do.
And I would add, learn about your community. Because yes, there will be the loud person who complains about something. There always is. But learn about your community. Recognize all of the community members. Learn about what everyone needs. And, learn about what your library's policies are. Because someone may come in and object to a book and feel like, oh, this doesn't reflect them. But it could reflect another member of your community. And if your policies are written correctly, you can back that with, hey, I'm supporting this member, these members of my community. That's why it's here.
Is there still excitement among students that are in library science?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
We just had a student come in to look for an internship recently. There's a lot of interest in the field. And I think one of the reasons is because it's we get to have these conversations, and it's not a static field, and we get to do this work. And we're a passionate group, and we don't go into this for anything other than the job itself. And yeah, there's still lots of excitement there. I think it can take people a little bit by surprise if they don't fully know what to expect, especially if they hit things like a conversation about book bannings or somebody's pushing back on something, and realizing just kind of how big our job can be.
Yes.
It can take people by surprise, but can also excite people.
And I think there's also some people who, there's excitement, definitely. I think there's some people who get a little too into the bookness of it, and they don't realize how much of this is working with people. And that is sometimes an adjustment. But the desire to defend, provide, and help is usually there in every one of them. And it's no matter which section of the profession, that is usually their goals.
Elizabeth and Jillian, thank you so much. I could sit here and talk with you all day about books and this topic, but unfortunately we have to move on. But thank you for providing us with needed information and giving us a little bit more excitement to today's podcast. Marist University's Elizabeth Clark and Jillian Freelander, thank you so much.
Okay, and as I look out of the window, it is sunny, it's nice and green. You know, it's the season where hope springs eternal. CBS News in 2015 asked, in which season are you most likely to go on a trip? Summer, spring, fall, or winter? And I'm not sure the results were surprising at all, but 53% said summer, and then spring and fall were each 15%, and winter is 13%. I think this may have to do with just, availability of when school's not in and the things you might like to do on a summer vacation. But I kind of like spring, and I'll take a long weekend wherever I can get it. But spring is a nice time. It's sort of like you come out of the winter and you're ready to shake off the winter doldrums. What say you others on this?
Yeah, I definitely agree with the majority here that summer is my favorite time to go on a trip, because I feel every winter for Christmas we always go to Houston to visit my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, and coming back from Houston where it's like 70, 60, 70, 80 degrees to New York where it's sometimes below freezing, it definitely makes it harder. But when we go in the summer to anywhere warm, coming back to the nice weather in New York definitely eases the post-vacation depression a lot.
Well, heck, I'll take any opportunity to go on a trip. But to Lee's point about just convenience, summer would certainly be the season that I and my family are most likely to go on a trip, just because the kids are out of school, as you pointed out, Lee. And there's a lot more flexibility. And there are many more things that, the kids, in my case, would like to do. So like going to theme parks and those types of things. And, going on a tour of baseball stadiums, Major League Baseball stadiums, which we're hoping to do this summer. So yeah, I would have to go with summer. How about you, Jay?
So I'm going to be in the minority here, which is good because we basically, are lining up with the poll here. I actually don't. I mean, I understand why the majority says that. It's right, school and availability time and stuff like that. Where we live, the summers are so beautiful because it's not particularly hot and humid, up in the upper Hudson Valley. It's just this amazing, lovely time of year. And winters are less lovely, let's put it that way. I like winter, I like snow, but by the time you get to February, I'm like, okay, I'm done with that. So I love traveling in the winter to warm places, like Neil was talking about. I don't necessarily love coming back, but I like to go and be on a beach or someplace in the winter for at least a while to thaw out. So yeah, I'm in the minority here of the, 13%?
Yeah,
but, I'm okay with that.
13. But I think also a lot of those folks in the 13, and I don't think you're included in that, are people who like to do things in the winter that are specific to the winter.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, like skiing,
me.
And some people, bemoan when it starts snowing and getting real icy and chilly, and some people are ready to pop figurative champagne at that point because they're heading to the slopes, and that's something that they can't otherwise do easily in other seasons and other climates. But so everybody's got their favorite season, and the reasons for it are fairly different, and explains why where you are maybe where you want to be or where you want to go to or something along those lines. So we're moving into the summer, and a lot of people are planning just what they will be doing this summer. And so that wraps it for this week, and we'll catch up with you next week.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week.
Poll Hub is produced by the Marist Poll at Marist University in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer. Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes Neil Viswanathan, Hunter Petro, and AJ Gambino.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review.
Positive reviews help other listeners like you find us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal.
If you have questions for us, tweet them at us at Marist Poll.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub.
And with any luck, it'll cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button.
Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next time.